Thank you so much, and thank you to Kate and your team for the invitation to come here. It's lovely to be back here in Oslo. And I was going to start with the Swedish Parliament a week ago when our Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson concluded her remarks on the security policy assessment and discussion by saying that Sweden is worth defending and Sweden is best defended in NATO. And wow, you know, that was more than 200 years of one policy shift for Sweden, who we have been navigating since the end of the Napoleon Wars, just actually without any treaty, just avoiding binding military security guarantees. And now we have 2 days later joined forces with Finland, and on Wednesday, May 18, last week, we turned in the NATO application. So I was going to focus my remarks here, just give you a little bit of a Stockholm perspective on this process these past months, and then touch briefly upon two major, you know, what comes next, what consequences could I see for European security ahead. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, Stockholm during this process has been looking mostly at Helsinki. And Helsinki has been looking at Moscow. And that has been the tour of the discussion. And there has been two processes, as many speakers have talked about this past half year. Of course, the Russian troop buildup, and later on the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And the second process, the draft treaties that Russia proposed to the US and NATO in mid-December on a new security order for Europe. And when it comes to, just to mention how Sweden assessed the Russian military buildup before Christmas, actually our official stance, it has shown the intel services, did not really believe in an invasion. We actually also discussed with the US on this in early December. The Swedish assessment was that this would be perhaps a new version of Little Green Men and, you know, hybrid warfare, or more of land grabs of Ukraine, but not a full-scale invasion. And then came the draft treaties in mid-December, and they were, of course, something that Sweden marked against, but not at the highest level of Prime Minister, but the Defense Minister went out and marked against it. And I'm talking about these two things because I think it's important. Here you start to see the shift a little bit, and my Finnish colleague will give you a more, you can question my analysis, but this is how it looked from Stockholm. Here we started to see that Helsinki was more concerned in December on the threat level of the buildup, but mostly, I think, on the draft treaties and what this would imply for the small states' space of maneuver. If this would come through, Russian will to roll back times to the Cold War, or even worse in some aspects of it, paralyzing future NATO enlargement, creating a buffer zone and a sphere of interest for Russia. This would be very, very bad, of course, for Sweden, but we did not realize it really in the same way as, I would argue, as Finland did. It was very clear at President Niinistö's New Year speech. If you haven't listened to it, I think this is an excellent speech, and it also drew a lot of international attention. I think we all started getting phone calls. Could you please comment on this? Because this was something we understood something was happening here. Still, Sweden did not comment until a week later or so. So we were not at the same place on levels of concern here. And I think after a while, it became very clear to us that Finland was activating its NATO option in its security doctrine. And even though Sweden and Finland have had, since 2014, I would say identical security doctrines, create a strong national defense, a strong relationship with NATO, very close partners, and also a range of other bilateral, trilateral arrangements. And the third component, strong proponents for the international rules-based order. Sweden did not have a NATO option. We did not say that if things get worse, we would have the option to join NATO. And I really didn't get it, to be honest. I tried to explain to international experts what's the difference, and I couldn't really answer it. But it became obvious here in January, February, that there was an advantage for Finland, because the parties in parliament somehow had captured that at some moment when things get really bad, we have to consider this at fast pace. And Sweden, on the other hand, we had pretty locked positions on NATO membership, polarized between the opposition and the government against, and the opposition for. And we have national elections coming up in September. So this means that things were not moving at all, especially in Stockholm. We did not have a plan, but we started to react more to what Helsinki did, actually. And this thing we had never thought either, because I think Sweden had assumed that perhaps as the biggest Nordic country, we would lead the way towards a possible NATO membership one day. But actually it turned out it was on the other side of the Baltic Sea that this happened. So, as Kate said in her introductory remark, there is a before and after February 24th, and I think that goes for most countries here. What happened in Sweden then was that the polls for NATO membership went up drastically, from around 35–40% up above 50%, and now it's up 60% for NATO membership. So we had a movement here. People looked around and felt that, oh, this is a bad situation. There is an alliance called NATO. Seems like a good idea to join. And that was a little bit the end of the analysis, I think, for most people. It made sense to join. We announced in early March, 2 weeks after the invasion, that Sweden would increase defense spending to 2%. ASAP, as I call it, but at the time limit, it has not really been set when we are going to reach this. And now with NATO membership coming up, it might, speed up even further. But we are concluding, looking at plans, and we will have this ambition. So that was very good news for us who do defense and security. But still, our Prime Minister around that time said that NATO membership would be destabilizing for Baltic Sea security, and that kind of upset also a lot of people in Helsinki, I think, because the discussion was moving a little bit in another direction. And I think this was actually the turning point. I want to make that a point. When Sweden understood that Finland was doing its assessment, and if Finland would land in that it would favor a NATO membership, Finland would do it anyway. It would be better to do it with Sweden, but Finland would go with or without Sweden. And that made a difference in Stockholm. That made the difference in Stockholm. It gave a shift in parliamentary support for NATO, because the Swedish Democrats, the third biggest party, said, okay, if Finland joins, we will switch our policy. So that was an easy analysis for them. But it meant that the Social Democrats, the government, started working with this around that time, around Easter, a little bit before. So this is not that many weeks back, actually. Our Prime Minister led that discussion and said that now the time has come for Sweden to really consider NATO membership. And why then? Well, just a week ago or so, we had a parliamentary group describing the security policy analysis of Sweden, and it's basically identical to the Finnish one. And I think President Niinistö said it the best. He said, he answered a question, what will you tell Russia when you say that you propose NATO membership? And he said, well, I will tell Russia, look yourself in the mirror. You caused this. And this is the same for Sweden. It's not possible to keep the dialogue with Russia. Finland has had a special one, but Sweden has had, the same ambition. It's not possible to stay outside of formal arrangements and rely on informal ally status when the risk level from a big neighbor possessing nuclear weapons is so big that it full-scale invade another neighbor. And we had not really figured out that this would happen, but it happened, and you have to change when things change. And I think the fact also that Ukraine was outside of NATO, that's also a lot of what actually ordinary people saw, I think, made a conclusion of that. So I will conclude just to say a couple of words on what this will bring. Militarily, and I know you will discuss this more tomorrow, this is a little bit of a wet dream for a defense planner, having Sweden and Finland inside of NATO with the Scandinavian peninsula, what you could do up in the high north, what you can prepare in the Baltic Sea, and how it can also the North Atlantic with the Gothenburg harbor. All of this comes together for defense planning, for operational planning in a way that is really, we should make something really good out of this, to my sense, and create that deterrence of denial area. Politically, I think what comes together is that 2 EU members joins NATO. And this is really what I want to leave for the discussion on order. But that order has fallen, to my view. I don't think we know the future order, but we know that we still have the institutions here in Europe. I'm talking about the regional security order, not the grand order. We have the EU, we have NATO. This is even more solidified when Sweden and Finland joins. And I think this is what we will build upon. It's an order that cannot include Russia. Doesn't mean that we will not have communication with Russia, but we will not sit at the table and feel secure together with Russia. We will balance against Russia within that order. And with that, I would like to thank you.